This one is titled Self-Talk Strategy, Turning Your Mind Around. So this is the first one in this series. It's some of the most effective techniques that I've found with working with your own mind, trying to create a sense of peace and joy and meaning and all that good stuff in your life. So I'm making these cards, front and back. This will be the first one of a series of cards that I do that I'll be, littering out in the world for people to find and to give to clients as simple references when we go through these techniques. I'll have PDFs of the cards below if you like the little cutout reminder for yourself. Those will be in the description along with notes for this video, as I have with all my videos. So I have notes on the side here. I'm going to be scrolling through those if you see my hand doing strange things over here. I made this technique with a client of mine who was having some trouble with negative self-talk. Big surprise, looks like it's very relatable. A lot of us have this problem, and we kind of have these automated self-deprecating voices inside our minds that tear us down and make us feel bad about mistakes that we make or ignorances we have or things of that nature. So it's a very widespread problem, and the solution I've found is pretty straightforward in a lot of ways. It's a simple process, which we'll be going through. It's a mixture of cognitive behavioral therapy and hypnotherapy, two of which that I think are very, very compatible methodologies that I will be making more videos about later on explicitly how they complement each other, more from a theoretical point of view. But this is more about practicality, things that you can do right now. You can go through this process with me, you can pause the video throughout or watch the whole thing to the end, pause it as you need, and you can do it all yourself on your own time. Now that part's out of the way, there's two different ways to achieve therapeutic results. The first one is, where did this negative pattern come from? The second one is, how do I redirect this and make it positive? So obviously both are very important. I'm not a huge proponent of going for where did it come from first. There's a bit of a modern obsession in psychology at the moment for explaining everything in terms of the origin, which it's useful information, but I don't know, I see people just desperately looking for, like, where in my childhood did this insecurity come from? Who hurt me in some way to cause this pattern in my mind? Which, as I said, valuable information, but I'd rather, if I had to pick between that or knowing what to do now to affect the change I want, I'd rather pick the second one, because you can easily know a cause without having a solution. But if you have the solution, the cause is often much less relevant. An example I like to use is I had this pinch in my shoulder blades back here. You can see where my thumb is, and I didn't know where it was coming from, and it was hurting all the time. I could just feel this weird muscular strain there, and I did some experimentation with my shoulder and realized that when I would use my arm to push forward, then it would hurt. And I thought to myself, okay, so that's what's causing it. So when do I have my arm push forward like that? And it turns out I would drive with my hand on top of the steering wheel with one hand and then just push to hold it there. And however many hours a day you're driving, that could be a lot of time in that chronically held position. So once I figured that out, I just started driving with two hands, and lo and behold, maybe a week later, pain was gone and it has not returned. So the why was very relevant, but the how, in terms of the practicing and the new behavior, that's what's actually healed my shoulder. So I think psychologically this principle applies in a lot of cases. As you get better at this particular skill, the self-talk redirecting skill, you'll get better and better at it. It does get automated eventually, especially if you consciously walk yourself through it verbally. You kind of talk to yourself out loud. Eventually it becomes like good posture or breathing through your nose. These habits that might seem very counterintuitive at first, eventually they get better and better with time. Just keep practicing, and soon you'll find yourself doing this without realizing it, and you'll be amazed at how fast you can turn these thoughts around. It's really, really incredible. So in order to make this like a little bit more concrete, I'm going to use a personal example of how I use this on myself. Hopefully it's an example of something a lot of you can relate to. Well, hopefully you can't relate to it because it's not good, but if you can relate to it, then hopefully it'll help. It's imposter syndrome, basically this feeling that even though you're doing something that you're objectively competent at, you feel like you're a fraud and that people will find you out. It's very common for people getting into a new field, especially if you're younger. You're kind of like, how can I take myself seriously? Putting myself into this identity publicly for those who don't know me this way already. And it can be a killer for motivation and for confidence and a lot of things. So I was able to work through this using this methodology. It's specifically in regards to me being a therapist and working with people's minds in the ways that I have been recently. So I'm young, I'm just getting into this. Imposter syndrome was a real thing, and now it's much better using this method. So we'll get into that. So the very first step on the back of this card here is number 1, awareness. What's happening now? So the easiest way to think about this, it's kind of like in the 12-step program, admitting you have a problem is the first step. That's step 1. So this is step 0, which is just simply knowing that there's a problem in the first place. Like admitting, even becoming aware that something bad is happening. A lot of times when we get into self-talk, we just assume that it's accurate, but there's a difference between that and actually making the jump to saying, oh, there's this rumination in my mind that is painful. So that's the first step, is just noticing it in real time. And you may not even notice it in real time. It might be after the fact, after the reaction, after the negative self-talk continues to spiral and cause problems. So becoming aware is the very first step. It takes practice, and you use that by checking in with your body. What's my body feel like? Am I tense in my forehead, in my throat, in my stomach? Does my heart rate go up? What is my breathing like? Is it getting faster and more shallow? What kind of thoughts are coming into my mind? Things of that nature. So when you become aware of that happening, that's the first thing you're going to want to use as a cue in order to start this process. That's the first domino of when I feel blank, then I do this process. So for me, for my imposter syndrome, what would come up would be like a feeling of shame, a feeling of fear, self-consciousness. This would happen especially when someone would ask me what I do for work, because I have many other sources of income, but this is the one that I kind of want to be my forefront identity. It's the thing I want to do full-time and have as my primary source of, you know, the role that I play in my community. And so whenever someone would ask me that, I would feel the imposter syndrome come up and feel like I didn't want to tell people, even though I've been working at it for years. I would have this desire to avert my eyes. I would breathe a little less easily. I could feel my forehead kind of cramp up, my chest kind of cramp up. Nothing fun, really, about that feeling. So clearly this needed work. It's also bad advertising if I'm trying to be a therapist and I'm freaking out simply by explaining that that's what I'm doing. And so I figured, hey, maybe this would be a good chance to do some work on myself. So once you identify what the responses are in your mind, then you want to see if you can consciously bring them up on command. So use your mind against yourself a little bit here. Go into the feeling, bring up the emotions and the body sensations on command, because once they're up, then you can actually see if the process is resolving them or not. You don't want to just do this in the abstract. You want to viscerally feel whatever negative emotion you're having and then calm it down with the processes going through. It's kind of like probing an injury. You know, like let's say you hurt your wrist and you say, okay, does it hurt if I lift it up? No. How about twist? Up, there it is. So you want to figure out the parameters of how the pain is actually feeling, and then you can work with it. So step number 2, get clarity. So what is the deeper complaint going on? When we have negative self-talk, it's usually expressing some kind of implicit complaint underneath. It's not always obvious what the complaint is. Sometimes it's kind of subtle. It might be buried. So I'm going to give you 2 potential options in case of imposter syndrome that were coming up for me. One of them is a little more shallow, which still gave me some progress, but there's actually a deeper layer to it that will round back up to later in order to get to the deeper layer, because sometimes you need to go through this process multiple times. The first one that actually came up with for me was, let's see here. It was the feeling of you are not qualified to perform the service that you are purporting to perform. So that was the feeling that would come up for me. That's the self-talk would basically be implying you don't have what it takes to do this right now. And that didn't feel good. And so we'll generalize that to you're unqualified. That's the feeling, comes with shame, comes with the feeling of fear that you might do something wrong. Someone will find you out, more or less that train of thought. And so let's assume that that's the real complaint. There's actually a deeper layer to it, which we'll get to later, but we'll go with that for now. And then we'll move on to the third step, which is Socratic questioning. So is it true? You're going to practice your Socratic questioning. Basically treat the claim like it's a scientific hypothesis. And what do we do with the hypothesis? Well, we subject it to scrutiny. We look for ways that it could be wrong. And so you want to take the claim and you want to basically just poke at it from all these different angles and find out what are the assumptions, what are the implications, why do you think this? Is there evidence for this? So if the complaint is you are not qualified, then you ask, is this true? And we'll use our Socratic questioning to find this out. I'll have another card linked in the description with lots of potential Socratic questions you can ask. Very effective, straight up CBT, very, very useful stuff. The first question will be, why is it important to know if this is true? So why is it important to know if I'm qualified or not? It's very obvious. It could be true. if it's true that you're not qualified for something, and if it's true that I'm not a qualified therapist, I could hurt somebody or myself. There are definitely times when we're not qualified to do things that we should have an adequate level of skill for, and we have a conscience that ideally will alert us and say, hey, you're outside of your comfort zone here. Maybe you should be a little bit more cautious with how you proceed. You want that active. That's not a bad thing, to have a part of your mind that tells you these things in order to keep you in the bounds of what's appropriate given your certain level of competence at this moment. So you definitely want to have that intact, but notice if it's coming up and then ask it, is it valid? Is this claim truly accurate in this moment? So you have to ask yourself, what does it mean to be qualified? Because in order to find out if it's true or not, you have to define your terms. So for me, for my therapeutic practice that I'm bringing to fruition in my life, there are 3 qualities that make me qualified for it. One is sufficient schooling and education. The second quality would be experience with helping people using these techniques. So you have the schooling, you have the experience, and finally, and this is kind of more of a core principle, is a deep desire to see the best in people bloom and transform in their lives. So if you don't have one of those 3 things, and this is my opinion, which I think many of you will probably agree with more or less, if you don't have education, experience, and a deep desire to help, you're probably not going to be a very effective therapist. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, but 3 is very necessary, especially if you're doing it professionally. So once we have those 3 criteria for qualification, we ask, have I met these criteria? And so for me, schooling, check, did that. Experience helping people, check, I've done that as well. Deep desire to see positive transformation, yes, that is also there. Okay, so this is looking good. It looks like that the belief that I'm not qualified is starting to be taken apart, but we have to flip to the other side. What does being unqualified look like? How would I define that? So there's lots of answers to this question. It's not like there's a straightforward way to just sum it all up in specifics, but a general sense would be you are unqualified if the people that you talk to and try to work with them to make their positive transformations come to life, if when you talk to them, they feel worse afterwards than better, then you're probably having some trouble there. And I would say you're unqualified if you're continuously seeing your results fail and make people feel worse. So now that we know what unqualified constitutes, then we say, is there evidence that I'm unqualified? And you have to look at your life and be honest with yourself. You have to be willing to see these things from as clear of a viewpoint as you can. You might sell yourself too short because you have a natural humility that bleeds into self-deprecation, or you might exaggerate your skills and your competence in various places and see yourself a bit from an arrogant position, a little bit more hubris than would be wise. So once we look at this, and in my case, I'll look at my life, and I can honestly say that if I look at the experiences I've had with people, talking to them about all the things that they want to do in their life, bringing themselves into greater alignment with their true purpose and how they can feel good about who they are and how they operate in the world, I can say, yes, I've seen pretty much universally good results. I could think of very, very few times, if any, where someone has genuinely felt worse after talking to me about these kinds of things. So I feel like at that point, we've gone through if I'm qualified, if I've had success in the past, if I have the appropriate desire to help people change their minds towards the best version of what they want to be. It seems safe to say that I have rationally dismissed my original fear. Logically, the belief has been debunked. So that's good logically, but sometimes that could be enough. You might feel better, and if you do, congratulations, you've successfully gone through the basis of this process, but it might be deeper than that. It might be something that's more of an emotional, unconscious level, and if that's the case, then there's more work that needs to be done, more hypnotic work, which we will get into right now. And this is where it gets interesting, trippy, dreamlike, and kind of fun. So the next step, number 4, is pivoting. If the complaint is true, what is the positive opposite? So let's say that you're not quite convinced. Let's say you're looking for deeper resources to undermine this negative emotion and biases. There's the Socratic questioning didn't quite undermine your conviction that there's still something to be addressed here. So the complaint in this case is you are not qualified. What's the opposite of that? The opposite is obviously you're qualified. That's what you're going for. You want to go for the feeling of being qualified. That's the positive opposite of the negative feeling you had previously. And so can we do better than that though? Is qualified enough? Might be a little lackluster. Maybe beyond qualified, how about competence? Or how about mastery? How about go big, mastery? Let's go with those. So Number 5, once you've identified the positive opposite, number 5 is, where can I find this opposite in my life? So in this case, we have competence and mastery. Where in my life can I find those things? So I look back at my life and I see all the skills that I've learned, all of the pursuits that I've undertaken, cultivated over the years. I think of lucid dreaming, I think of jazz and classical guitar, I think of skateboarding, slacklining, things that I've thrown my hat into and had a good amount of success developing competence, if not some degree of mastery in those things. And you're going to want to pick a situation that really exemplifies the feeling well. You want it to be unambiguous and something you have really no doubt about. So for me, since it's an oldie but a goodie, I'll pick skateboarding because that one just nails it for me. And it's just a really good, it's a really easy thing for me to think about that will kind of across the board make me feel like I know the feeling of mastery, because I did pretty well there. So number 6, intensify the new opposite using either metaphor or imagery. So you want to create some kind of image or metaphor in your head that encapsulates this feeling of whatever you're going for, in this case, competence or mastery, and then note how it feels in your mind and in your body. So for skating, the thing that really exemplifies mastery and competence for me is big buttery kickflips. So if you know what a kickflip is, if not, look it up. It's very simple, but it's one of the most satisfying things that you can do on a skateboard because it's easy to get really good at, and there's so much style variation you can put in there. So I'm thinking of like, I go through the process of what it's like to go through that experience on command in each moment, the feeling of the board popping up, the sound of the shoe sliding up, the grip tape, that solid flat catching sound when the board hits my feet in the air, and then that stomping on the ground with no break in my stride, smooth, easy. That feeling is intoxicating. I could do it 1,000 times a day. It's so good. It's such a happy feeling. And so once you identify and connect that feeling in your mind and in your body, then you want to revel in it. Just enjoy the feeling for, a minute or so, kind of get the goosebumps, get the happy, joyful sensation of truly being in that state of mind that is the opposite of the negative implication from earlier. So in the case of skating, it's very kinesthetic, so it's pretty easy to just have that be sort of its own metaphor. But let's say I picked lucid dreaming as a category for competence and mastery. That's a lot more abstract. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what lucid dreaming would be like. So in that case, you might want to use a metaphor, something a lot more, something more symbolic to encapsulate what you mean by mastering lucid dreaming. So in this case, I could use like a clean window, a shining clean window that I just, or a telescope or something that I've constructed there that exemplifies what I mean by truly finding mastery in my lucidity, in my dreams. And so those are a couple options of what you could do there. Whatever you pick, though, you want it to connect to this sense of mastery, skillfulness, excitement, at least in the case of what these feelings bring out for me: mastery, skillfulness, excitement, courage, power in my chest and in my hands. That's the positive opposite towards that unqualified, inept feeling from earlier that was being brought up by this negative self-talk. So that's number 6. Number 7 is you want to take that positive, you want to place the positive opposite on the negative feeling. So whatever the negative feeling is, you kind of want to use your image and your metaphor in your mind and sort of place it on top of that, kind of mix them together, think about the problem with the solution in mind, and see what happens. So you want them to interact, and ideally there should be some insight or some perspective that you get from the positive feelings, a sort of a leveling up in an internal state of mind that you've gathered from whatever category of action that you're using to contrast with the negative feeling. And so you're going to want to apply those ideas, mindsets, perspectives, upgrades to the negative feeling and see how that goes. So in my case, the insights and the perspectives that I've gained would be that I should practice my therapy practice the way that I skateboard. And that would be with eagerness, with confidence, with focus, with really sharp reflexes that I repeat again and again and again. And then if I think about that and it makes me feel good, then I know I'm on the right track. Then there's a little release of tension there and say, okay, I'm sort of getting the hang of this. I think I kind of know what my mind wants me to do here. So that's number 7. Number 8 is reinforce. So regardless of how well it worked, if it worked a little bit, if it worked really well, if you just kind of blew something out of the water, good news, but do it again. Do it a couple more times. Reiterate, go through this process several times, soak up all the good feelings, and then just blast that negative feeling with the positive perspectives and insights again and again and again, and just kind of clean it up, make it feel really integrated and compacted so that the new feeling becomes more of a default reflex, if you will. And once you do that, it should start transforming before your eyes. And it can be pretty impressive how fast this works, and it can be little things. Let's say you have a little insecurity that pops up because someone says something slightly offhand, or something strange happens that you didn't see coming. Negative self-talk might pop into your mind, and then you can instantly just, oh, what do you mean by that? And then go through this whole process in your mind. And it can take just a minute or two when you get really good at it. But number 9, did it work? So let's say a little troubleshooting here. Let's say it didn't quite work. Let's say that you go through this process even several times, and you still feel this kind of lingering sense of heaviness, or something like it didn't quite get to the base layer of whatever the issue was. So there's a couple problems there. One could be that the initial complaint that you identified was not actually accurate or didn't quite go deep enough. So as I mentioned earlier, I deliberately chose a plausible but ultimately unsatisfying version of the complaint to demonstrate these ideas with. The initial complaint in dispute was, I'm not qualified, but after more reflection, it actually went deeper than that. The new complaint is, I'm not capable of becoming qualified. Now that is a much different thing, because one is just a state of my skill at the moment, which can be improved. The other one is more of a state of capacity, which can't be improved. Your capacity is kind of just inherent in who you are. And if you believe that you're not qualified, it implies that you can become qualified. If you believe you're not capable of becoming qualified, then that's much more denigrating to your inherent character. And that's a lot more destructive. So once we've gotten there to the deeper layer of what the initial insecurity might be, then we want to go all the way back up to the earlier stages and run through them again. So you want to Socratically question the new position, find out if it's true or not, find out what the new contrasting qualities might look like, and then come up with more imagery, more metaphors from other parts of your life, superimpose them onto the feeling, eventually resulting in a kind of blowout. You want the new positive feeling to outcompete, if you will, the old negative feeling, and you keep repeating that process again and again. The second troubleshooting thing that might be the case is if the metaphor or the imagery that, let's say you identified the complaint correctly, but your metaphor or imagery wasn't quite meaningful enough for you to really give you the firepower you need to undermine the negative feelings. So you might have to dive deeper into the symbolism that you're coming up with. This stuff takes practice. Unconscious associations, the more dreamlike, random associating with your mind to come up with imagery and metaphors that connect on an unconscious level to the feelings that you're going for. Not everyone's a natural at that. Especially if you're not good at visualizing, this might take some rehashing again and again and again. And there's other techniques and other videos in here of how to get good at these skills as their own particular goal that are worth practicing. But once you have it down, this gets easier and easier. The more you do it, the better you'll get at it. And like many things in life. So ultimately, you'll know if it's working because you'll think about the problem in mind with the solution also in mind, and then you'll just let them interact. And if you do that and you feel better, then it worked. Or at very least, even if you don't feel a whole lot better, you might feel more optimistic about going forward, improving. You might feel like, at least I have a sense of direction. And so let's say after all of that, all fails, you feel pretty much exactly the same as you did from the beginning. And this, depending on how deep and profound the problem is, this could be the case. And so if that's the situation, then practice acceptance. And I know that sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but sometimes it's really all you can do in each moment. If the pain is extreme, and if you're really having trouble integrating or really penetrating the very dense layers of some extreme emotional turbulence, then all you might be able to do is just breathe and relax and accept that the situation is the way it is right now, and time and sleep and new perspective and possibly some wise counseling might be in order, because we can't do everything on our own. We can do a lot on our own, especially if you're diligent, but every now and then you need somebody to lean on, as we all do. So I hope that all makes sense. To recap, we're going to go through one at a time. We have awareness, what's happening now. We have get clarity, what is the deeper complaint. We have is it true, Socratic questioning. We have 4, pivot, if true, what is its positive opposite. Number 5, where can I find this opposite in my life? Number 6, intensify the new opposite. Number 7, place the positive opposite on the negative feeling. Number 8, reinforce, develop the imagery or the metaphor. Number 9, did it work? Get more clarity or positivity. And if all else fails, number 10, proceed to practice acceptance. So just like good posture, like I said, these things take time to become fully integrated. Once they do, you'll feel so much better. The more you can do this and the more it becomes a reflex, then the faster you'll be able to basically rocket ship yourself out of any negative wave that happens to wash over you. It happens depending on who you are and what your constitution is like. It might happen more or less to you, but no matter how deep you go, you can always come out of it. I guarantee it. I've seen people come out of the most insanely entrenched deep holes and then come out to this bright, shining, beautiful example of their best self. And then sometimes they'll come back in and sometimes they'll come back out, but it's the upward trajectory with these people is incredible, especially if they make this a truly dedicated practice to revisit again and again and again. Ultimately, what these painful feelings really are is just a desire for attention to some aspect of yourself that is yet to be fully, properly fit into who you are and to how you fit into this world. So if you're feeling pain, it means something needs some love at that moment. So I hope you found this information useful. As always, I have the PDFs down below and the notes and the images from the cards, they're all down there as well. You're welcome to use those at your convenience. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. You know what to do. More of these kinds of videos soon. The Therapy Nuggets series will hopefully be chocked full of lots of delicious nuggets for you guys. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your focus. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.